I just moved into a small countryside town, into a house that was just beside a huge forest. It was a new neighborhood and didn't really have many houses on my street. You could, without a doubt, walk hours into the woods and still be going. Being young and stupid, I would take my dog for a walk without having my parents with me or anything to protect me. I don't even remember having a cell phone on me. Don't blame my parents, please. They were reassured by the fact that my dog was really big and people were easily frightened by him. Like, really easily. My dog was about 7 at the time, which is an important detail for later. And I did that often, and nothing bad ever happened, and I never really met anyone there. I loved it because I could really take my mind off of everything else that was happening in my life. The moving was rough on me, and to make everything more fun, I was being bullied at school. So I really needed that. So there I was, casually walking on a track that is across the wood that is used if you have a motocross or a quad. A noise that I didn't pay too much attention to at first was coming from behind me, and it started to become louder. When I turned back, I could see a person coming straight at me on his motorcycle. Now I'm a 13-year-old girl who is scared of about everything that seems out of the ordinary. So I decide to get off the track as quickly as I can to hide. Unfortunately for me, Henry is so large and doesn't really blend in with the surrounding, as everything was green too and he kind of stuck out in the middle of the day. I walked pretty fast, but I could tell that the bike was closer and I was pretty obvious. I started running and found a rock that was big enough to hide my dog and I behind. I heard the motocross come and go. It was impossible for the person to see us, really. I waited, telling myself that I was being silly. When I thought that I had waited long enough, I started walking again. I froze instantly when I heard the loud engine becoming suddenly so close to me again. Without hesitation, I started running like crazy, and when I was able to stop and hide, I did. My dog wasn't in the best shape, and I was feeling so bad for making him run that much. I could tell that he was getting closer and closer to me. It wasn't a very dense forest, so he could follow easily. And he was so much faster than me. I'm a clumsy person. I trip on about everything I can, so when I did meet this lovely branch, I fell on the ground pretty hard after tripping on it. But I think that I was so full of adrenaline that I just got up and started running again. He was meters from me, so he could see me and he was clearly chasing me. There was no doubt in my mind that if he got to me, something really bad could happen. We were approaching a more dense part of the forest, so the guy had no choice but to stop. It gave me an advantage on him, and I was able to get away. I was so glad when I finally saw the house. It was under construction, so nobody lived in it. But I did find a hiding spot behind this fence. Minutes later, I saw the person come so close to me. I could tell that he didn't see where I went, though. I felt this huge relief when he started to go away. I think I stayed hidden for about 30 to 40 minutes without moving, to make sure that he did not come back. I did find my way home and told my parents about it, but they thought that I was being dramatic. At the end, I never knew who this person was. I did hurt myself, but nothing too serious. I heard years later that they were growing illegal substances in a part of the woods, and there were cameras out there too. Maybe I came too close to something and they saw me on the camera. I also went with friends of mine when I was older, and found a small abandoned house that was no far from where this had all happened. This story takes place this summer in August when I went to visit my friend in another city. I had been there for one day, and this night we decided to go out for some drinks and for dinner. While we were walking to the restaurant, dressed to the nine, a couple of men older than us stopped and asked what we were doing that night. We chatted and they asked if we would be willing to come for a drink with them after. My friend and I, being young and liking the attention of course, said that we would see how we feel. And they said that they would be staying at the restaurant that we saw them at outside of, and that their usual table was right next to the patio entrance. We went for our dinner, and as we were walking back and not thinking of these men that we had previously encountered, we heard them calling over, and they said to just join us for a drink. My friend and I kind of looked at each other, and it was only about midnight, so we decided that we would go and join them for just a drink. My friend is hilarious, and we're both relatively assertive, so she decided to ask for 2 triples and a shot of an expensive tequila when they asked what we wanted to drink. They laughed and said how they liked that she knew what she had wanted. The drinks came out pretty quickly, but these shots were taking a while, and one of the gentlemen had gotten up and left the table, we assumed to take a call. After a few minutes, the gentleman came back to the table and sat down next to my friend, and the shots came out not long after with the waitress. Not thinking anything of this, my friend and I took our shots, and almost 5 minutes later, my friend looked at me and said, "Something's wrong, I don't feel right." My friend in general tends to overreact in some of these situations, so I try to brush it off and just not worry about it. The next part of the story is not coming from my own perspective, it's coming from my friend's recollection because, unfortunately, I don't remember anything else from that night. My friend said that I began slurring my words and acting a lot more drunk than I should, given the amount of that I had to drink, and one of the gentlemen suggested that they give us a ride home, because I wasn't looking so well and I had probably drank too much. My friend asked if they had a car because, in this big city, it's not common to drive around, it's more common to taxi or Uber, and they had pointed to a Rolls Royce that had illegally tinted windows, and was running with the driver in the front about 5 feet from the patio that we were sitting on. It had been there for around 30 minutes too, the entire duration that we had been. My friend immediately got a weird feeling, and though she was also feeling kind of loopy and dizzy, she got both of us out of there. She said that she provided no explanation. She grabbed me by the arm and started dragging me down the street in a downtown, highly populated area while booking an Uber. According to my friend, the entirety of the Uber ride, I was sweating profusely, vomiting. I could barely walk. I could not speak. My eyes were rolled back and I was completely incoherent. When asking my friend about how I had gotten so sick, and she didn't, she reminded me that she had been drinking a lot the night before and wasn't feeling that great. So she only took about a third of the shot, because she wasn't able to finish the whole thing because she thought she was going to puke. Me, on the other hand, of course, I took the entirety of the shot, and clearly got a higher dose of whatever was given. Next day, of course, I felt like absolute garbage, but needless to say, I think my friend definitely saved both of us that night, if not just me from an unknown group of men who had unknown intentions with 2 young drunk and drugged girls in the heart of a big city. I am from a small town, the kind where you're in the same class with these same kids from preschool through graduation. I was never popular and I had my fair share of bullies, but never as bad as one kid in my class, Max. He was on the shorter side and had these little round glasses with his hair slicked to the side, like he was right out of a movie cast as the stereotypical nerd. He kept to himself and didn't really interact with others if he could avoid it. Fast forward to 8th grade, when we were paired as lab partners and had to sit at the same table together every day for the entire year. I considered myself a nice person and always went out of my way to make sure that I wasn't rude to people, especially people who hadn't done anything to deserve it. So of course, I was friendly and happy to be his partner, as long as he did his fair share of the work. The year came and went, but he was shy but polite, and we got along fine being partners. 9th grade started and I had a lot of troubles at home with my birth father, so I chose to move in with my mother a few towns over. I was only about 30 minutes away, but I had to start at a completely new school a month into my freshman year, and honestly it was scary. I may not have been popular at my last school, but I did have several friends who I loved and missed dearly. My mom would often drive me to the other town to see my friends and hang out. and I also started making new friends at my new school. It was a good setup, and I continued this way until I was 16 and I could drive myself. I never heard anything from Max, and honestly, I had kind of forgotten about him. That was until my junior year of high school. I started casually seeing this other guy, Jack, from my hometown, and he had asked me to go with him to prom. I was excited and happy to say yes, as I would get to spend the night with him and my friends from childhood. A couple of months before prom, my mother told me that there was a new lady at her job, and she was asking about me because her grandson was seeing me, and she wanted a picture so that she could put a face to my name. My mother knew Jack and knew that this wasn't his grandmother, so she had asked his name, and when you know it, it was Max. My mother showed her a picture of me and said that she had on her desk, and the lady went on her way. A few weeks later, she asked for the color of my prom dress so that she knew what to get Max so that we could match. My mother was confused but told her that it was pink. About 2 weeks before prom, some of my friends from my hometown told me that Max had been telling some people that we were going to the dance together and that he was so excited. I thought this was creepy, but I didn't put too much thought into it. The night of the prom, I picked Jack up and we headed over to the school and would find Max and his grandmother waiting outside the entrance so that she could take pictures of us before we go in. Now, I was not one to disappoint people, so I politely took a couple of pictures with him as my actual date stood off to the side and waited. If Max's grandmother was confused that I had another date, she didn't show it. The rest of the night went smoothly, and Jack and I had a great time. We didn't see Max anymore, and I assumed he had left. Other than his grandmother telling my mom that he had lost my number and tried to get it for him, which she thankfully didn't do, I didn't hear much from him until we had graduated. I went to a state college and had heard that he had gotten into a well-respected private university. Everything was fine for the first few weeks of college, and then I ran into him. He had caught me on the way to class one day. I was polite and asked him if he was a student here too, which he was, and I chatted with him for a minute before hurrying off to class. It was a relatively harmless interaction, but it still creeped me out a bit since I knew he got into that other school and wondered why he had chosen to go to a state college. For the next few months, I ran into him almost daily. He always wanted to talk and never seemed to be with anybody else. I found out from some girls in my dorm that he had been hanging around asking about me and trying to figure out my class schedule and where I would be and when. He also told them that he was my boyfriend, and he had passed up a scholarship to another college to come here and be with me instead. They figured out that he was lying when they never saw us together for long periods of time, or him being up in the rooms with me, and they stopped answering his questions. I left at the end of the semester to move home and take classes at a nearby school. I did not tell him, obviously. The following year, I got married to my boyfriend from my senior year of high school. Dumb, I know. Anyway, we were in a small town which is in the same county as my hometown for a fair while shortly after the wedding. While walking around and enjoying ourselves, I see Max staring at us at the end of the block. It was the first time that I had been genuinely fearful of him, as the look on his face was nothing short of hatred. I tried to ignore him and went about my night, seeing him a few more times, always with that look on his face. The next few years passed by with me hearing nothing from him at all. I didn't even know if he still lived around the area or not. I found out a little while after that he did, when I started working at a clothing store in town, and he would stop and sit in that dad chair next to the door for all the guys to hang out in while their people shopped. I mentioned it to my manager because of our history, and the fact that he would stare at me constantly while sitting there, but he always came in with a girl, and I later found out that it was his sister, so they didn't think too much of it. He never spoke to me, just stared. When I was in my mid-20s, I moved to a city in my home state, but was still several hours away from my small town. I'm 30 now and I'm doing well in life. Other than a random Facebook friend request, which I rejected, I haven't heard from him. I hope that it stays that way. "3 days ago, my old man went out of town. The first night, I heard what I assumed was a large critter. As of 4:13 a.m. when I posted this, I think they're gone for good. And this is long but recent and a true story. I want to say that I'm glad they left or knew that I was armed, not worth the attempt to break in. Whatever reason. 2 nights ago, I was awoken by my dog between 11 and 3 a.m. at most. He kept me near when I got up and made a low, aggressive growl facing out of my room, but he kept close to me. He's never done this before, and I've worked with canines for years. This gave me a gut feeling in that I heard it. Someone talking. In my yard, no more than 20 feet by the sound. Low mumbling, bad whispering. I was blaring Return of the King. Yes, extended. I need to add that I've had childlike hearing at my age for context. If you speak in a one-floor home with 2 doors closed at a whisper, I could probably make out the words. He went quiet when I opened a drawer too loud to grab my hidden 380, chambered around and noticed a shadow passing by the light outside, and the blurred window. I had blackout curtains. Home was clear. All the doors were locked. Nothing odd so, but my dog peeled out. I held my flashlight in one hand, went his way, and called him to the other side. He was gone, but I guess they knew I was home and they had run on foot. I went around with thought, okay, I'm probably good. Well, Florida continues to be Florida. Night 3. My dog does this again in the same frame, waking me up, and at this rate, I had just got the 12 gauge. My dog was acting far more protective and gave me the dog body language for major threat. Need the pack, can't handle alone. I froze for a moment. 2 people now. This is not good. They must intend to violently take whatever they could be after. It wasn't a one-on-one. I can't risk getting the look. At this rate, they mean business and had to be armed to scope out a place with a Ring doorbell. 60 pounds of muscle of a dog and my grown butt with a lifetime of handling guns. In the yard around 2:30 a.m. for a second night, they knew I and my dog were home but clearly had a goal. This time, voices were behind the home. My dog then pulled a frickin' Leroy Jenkins. He gave off the most aggressive, loud bark that I've ever seen any dog do and ran to the wall. I ran to his side and yelled, "Mess them up, they're dead men." Now stuff's clicking for me. This was planned and professional. I check every inch of the property with the shotgun. My dog was worked up and spooked but calming. I'm buying a mistake for this one, and a good one. I went inside. I literally kept that gun on me chambered and in reach of my bed. I barely slept that night. Day 4. I did a bit of looking around for misplaced, slightly moved objects or scratched up locks. Yep, one trash can by the gate was rotated 180 degrees, with the handle facing me, not the wall as it's always been placed. A few crushed, dead twigs as I went back. The head chair was turned and moved to the right. A clearly odd thing as that table set is symmetrical, so it's glaringly obvious out of place if you live there. The Ring and my neighbors so far show nothing, but any of these guys had to have known he left. Knew his son lives there, that the dog would eat them and is huge. I had a gun and I even announced that I was armed, yet they came back with backup. And then the dude came back up. Moved stuff I didn't know till my Marine buddy told me to check if so much as a rock was out of place. It's a way to gauge the person's awareness, presence, I guess. Whatever your goal was, I hope you don't come back and I hope we never actually meet face to face. Otherwise you might actually be in trouble.